And we are now recording. Welcome everybody to the Kidlit Distance Social. I'm John Bard. In a minute, you are going to be led by Laura Backus, and she'll be along to talk with Nick Bruel. But before that, which is a couple of little pieces of business to take care of. The first thing I'm going to do is change the name under me so it says Laura, because she's the star of the show, not me. Okay. So here's the deal. We do this every week. We started doing this back in March, and the point of it was to provide a sense of community and connection during a very difficult time and have some fun. We have a good time here. And also to educate you and introduce you to great, really cool people like Nick Bruel, for example. And we would love for you to join us every week and love for you to share the links and spread the news so that we get more and more folks here every week. That's the way we like it. The way to get on our list so that you can be sure to be notified of each of the week's guests and the topics for each week, and also to get the links for the replays, which come up the next day. Here's the link at the bottom, rightforkids.org/ultimate-cheat sheet. And what you're going to get is the Ultimate Children's Writing Cheat Sheet. It's something we created for our 30th anniversary, which is this year. And it really, you can see what it gives you. It's just a no-nonsense, boiled down, the information you need to start as a writer and keep writing. It's all there for you. It's really, really good. We work very hard on it, and it is free. It's our gift to you. So just go to that address, rightforkids.org/ultimate cheat sheet, and we'll send it to you, and you'll be on our notification list. For those of you who don't know us, we publish Children's Book Insider. It's the Children's Writing Monthly. It is something we've been doing since May of 1990. And every month we have lots of interviews with top authors and a lot of really deep craft writing information, market news that we get when we find out about publishers and agents looking for submissions and contests and other opportunities like that. And also the Above the Slush Pile code, which you see on the bottom of this one. This was Doubleday Books on this particular issue. But we hear from when we interview an editor or an agent, we always ask them, can we get a code so that our people can submit their work and have it be above the slush pile, get right to you? And in many cases, they're from editors and agents that don't normally accept unsolicited, well, editors more, that don't accept unsolicited submissions. So it's not just a chance to get on the top of the pile, it's a chance to get in the pile. So that's really a powerful thing. We also, if you join, you get access to the thing you see on the left, which is our website, the CBI Clubhouse. We have the Children's Writing Knowledge Base there, which is a huge library of articles and information about writing for kids. And we have tons of free stuff in there, like webinars and videos and ebooks and tons of stuff. It's the best $5 you could possibly spend if you're really at all serious about wanting to write for children. So we have a special deal for our socialites, that being you, just $5 a month. And you can cancel at any time, or you can stick around as long as you like. rightforkids.org/CBI. If you're watching the replay, look right below you. It's there. That's it for me. Now it's time to turn you over to my partner and my wife, Laura Backus. And you know what? We'll leave the camera on. Let them see behind the scenes here.
Let's not tempt fate with technology anymore this week. So hi, everyone. I am going to transport myself to another place and then stop sharing the screen here. If you're new to us, every week I am in some place that is a literary landmark, and you have to guess where I am. And this one should be pretty easy for a lot of you. This is the same building. This is the front, this is the back. So I want you to guess in the chat box where I am, right here. I know some of you have probably been there. So, okay, yes, I see some countries being guessed here. Yes, a lot of you are in the right country. Ooh, I saw one go by. Wait. Yes, a few of you got this. Yes, it's definitely Amsterdam. And this is Anne Frank's house. And several of you guessed this, and I'm sorry, the first one just whipped by me there in the chat box. So good for you all for guessing that. So let's go back to the slide. So yes, this was the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam, and as I'm sure all of you know, this is where Anne and her family and four other people spent 2 years during World War II hiding from the Nazis. And this picture on the left is the original doorway to the annex of the building. The building was actually where her father had his business, but his business was basically taken away from him by the Nazis. He was not allowed to run a business as a Jew, but he had a lot of his old colleagues were still working in the building, and they helped. And so here's the annex. Two of the colleagues crafted this door to the annex, which looked like a bookcase, and it could swing in and out. It had latches on each side. And then they changed the way the room looked around it. They hung a map over there and put wallpaper up. And so it looked just like a bookcase, and then they papered over the window. So it was successful for a couple years until there was a police raid and it was discovered. And there's a lot of theories that the police were tipped off. But what I really wanted, the reason I'm using this today for our world travels is, as you also know, Anne was given a diary for her 13th birthday right before she and her family went into hiding. And she used that diary and many other notebooks to write during those 2 years. And after the family was discovered and everyone was sent to Auschwitz, the only one to survive was her father, Otto. And when he came back to this house, he decided to publish her diary because he knew she wanted to be a writer. And it was published in June 47. And it was called The Secret Annex. And that, of course, has gone on to be an incredibly world-renowned book, as well as a lot of other of Anne's writings, translated into 70 languages, adopted for the stage and screen. And in 1960, this became a museum, and her dad oversaw it until his death. But what's really interesting, I want to read you a few quotes from some of her writing. Now remember, she's 13 and 14 years old when she's writing this. Here's a quote. "Look at how a single candle can both defy and define the darkness. How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world." And this one I love. "Dead people receive more flowers than the living ones because regret is stronger than gratitude." Did your head just explode? She's 14 when she wrote that, and she's hiding from the Nazis. And so we are talking about this tonight, about subversive characters in Kidlit, but I wanted to just also really have you think about what subversive means here. Here's a definition of subversive: tending or intending to subvert or overthrow, destroy, or undermine an established or existing system, especially a government, authority, or set of beliefs. Anne Frank was subversive. Her entire family was subversive. All the people who helped her were subversive. They were undermining the power structure of the day. And Anne refused to have her spirit destroyed by the Nazis. And that's why her spirit survives to this day. So when we talk about subversive, you know, sometimes that has a very negative connotation, but it can also be very noble. And there's different types of subversion that your characters can have. And so I want you to just keep all that in mind as we go through this discussion today, because I think that this topic we'll just touch the surface today, but I think it is something that we can certainly circle back to because it's got a lot of depth to it and a lot of really interesting facets to it. So I just wanted to put that out there as we continue. Okay, now I'm going to go back to my children's book insider background. So the other thing that I would like to know is, where in the world are you? So as I have said in past socials, but if you are here for the first time, I would really love to find out where you are. And if you live near a literary landmark, or, I'm going to broaden this because we do this every week. So we got to broaden what we're looking for too here. Any literary themed place, anything that inspires you, anywhere that you like to go write, I would really love to hear about it. And we would love it if you would take a picture of yourself and send it to us. If it's a landmark and there's a plaque or something that identifies it, please don't have the plaque in the picture, so we have to guess where you are. And then you can email it to me with a brief description of where you were and permission to use the photo on our Kidlit Distancing Social, and attach the photo as either a JPEG or give me a link as to where I can download it, as long as it belongs to you. And email it to mail@writeforkids.org. And please put "where in the world" in the subject line so I know which email box to put it in. We would love to feature you on a distancing social. And you know what? A lot of people are kind of shy about having themselves in photographs. You don't have to be in the picture. You can send me the picture and just your name, and we'll put your name up there with the picture. And a couple of you have done that already. I appreciate it. And we're going to get to some of your pictures next week. But I would really love to see where you all are, and any literary landmarks, places, anywhere you like to go write would be great. So now we get to celebrate. This is probably my favorite part of the whole week, what we do every week. This is where we celebrate the successes of our people. So Marna Magellan wrote, "I've been reading the interviews written by Lynn Marie ever since my first copy of Children's Book Insider. I read one about a brand new agent, Courtney Price at Ravenquill Literary, and queried her. Thanks to your newsletter and to one interview in it, I am happy to announce that I signed up with her at the agency. Yay, Marta, congratulations. That's awesome." Diane Elgin had her debut picture book, Daddy, How Does a Sloth Give a Hug?, released in July from Elk Lake Publishers. And in this story, Kayla asks her dad how various animals give a hug, and she has a great time getting hugs from different animals. I bet that is a really fun book to read with a little kid. So Diane, congratulations on that. And I want to give a shout out to Beaming Books editor Naomi Kruger, who wrote on her blog After the Rain, naomikruger.com, about acquiring one of our subscribers, Rebecca Cohen's picture book, After the Rain. Actually, I'm sorry, her blog's not called After the Rain. That was the title of this particular post. So go to naomikruger.com. Anyway, the book was called After the Rain. And she talked about how she gave us one of those wonderful above the slush pile submission opportunities in her interview in CBI. And Rebecca used it, submitted, and her book got published. So congratulations to Rebecca, and Naomi, thank you very much for mentioning that in your blog. I also want to hold up this lovely book. I believe a couple weeks ago we mentioned this on the Celebrate section. This Lift the Flap book from our member Deb Bruel, and she sent me a copy of it. Isn't that sweet? And it has Lift the Flap, so it's extra fun. So thank you, Deb, for the book. Hint, hint. Anybody else who wants to send me a book? I will hold it up. So it's adorable. It's really adorable. Normally we don't pat ourselves on the back quite so much in the Celebrate section. This just happens to be, we got a lot of great subscribers sending us this information. But I wanted to use this opportunity to just tell some of you who are new to us and maybe new subscribers to our newsletter. John mentioned those above the slush pile codes in the newsletter. They're awesome. Clearly they work. But also, if you're using them, please be extra careful to notice the expiration dates on those codes, because very often they're good for a month. And so if you are reading a back issue of the newsletter, when you subscribe, if you subscribe to a year, you also get access to our whole back issue archive, which is great. You can go read 5 years worth of issues if you want. But some of those codes are going to be expired. And so we want to really be respectful of that, because these editors and agents are giving us these special opportunities, and it's really a gift to our subscribers. And so we want to honor that and make sure that we stay within the parameters that they give us. So I just wanted to put that out there, and thank you all for letting us know your successes. So I want to hear your good news. You can email me at mail@writeforkids.org and put celebrate in the subject line, and I will feature you on a future distancing social. And as I say every week, but again, we have a lot of new people here tonight, it doesn't have to be a publishing contract or getting a literary agent. It can be you finished the first draft of your manuscript, or you finally implemented all the edits that your critique group gave you, or you came up with a great idea this week that you're really excited about. Any little step in the process is worth celebrating, and we want to celebrate with you. So send me your good news. I really want to hear it. Okay, now we get to take a poll. So, sorry, you cannot vote. You'll have to join us next time on our actual link. Here's our poll question this week. What's your favorite funny Kidlit book from this group of classics? The Monster at the End of This Book by John Stone, Frankenstein, and these aren't, a lot of these are current too. They're not all classics. Frankenstein by Samantha Berger, Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus by Mo Willems, Captain Underpants series, Dave Pilkey, The Stinky Cheese Man and Other Fairly Stupid Tales by John Skezga, I Want My Hat Back by John Klassen. So vote, please. This is very, very scientific. Publishing is waiting for the results. And believe it or not, we actually like gathering this information from you, because it gives us ideas for different things we can talk about on future distancing socials, maybe webinars or articles we'll do for Children's Book Insider. So we actually use this information. I'm just looking, you can't see the results yet, but I can. A lot of you have not read Frankenstein by Samantha Berger. You need to. That is your assignment this week. You need to go out and get that book and read it. And then next week, I want you to report back to me in the chat box if you liked it. Okay, 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, and 1. The polls are closed, and I will share the results. Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus is a runaway winner by Mo Willems. I can't argue with any of these. If any of these books I would have been happy with if you voted for. So, but you gotta love the pigeon. Okay, and you know what? A subversive character, yes. Yes, so we will be talking about the pigeon maybe in a few minutes. Okay. Links of interest. Every week I pull some interesting stuff from the world of publishing and present it to you. So there is an article in the July 17th issue of Publishers Weekly called Children's Booksellers Plan for an Uncertain Fall. And it talks about how independent bookstores are making adjustments to what they're buying right now, and as well as how they're selling books. And the reason I think you should read this if you have a book coming out is not to get you all depressed, because it's really not a depressing article, but it talks about how publishers are hand selling books right now, maybe more than they used to, because maybe a lot of their customers are calling up and going, I need a recommendation, you know, of a great, funny middle grade book. And so if you have a book coming out and you go get to know your local booksellers and tell them about your book, they are more likely to hand sell it to their customers. It also talks about how publishers are kind of, or publishers, bookstores are doing some sort of interesting things to engage their audience, their customers, get the word out. They can't have in-store book signings, but they're doing maybe stuff on Zoom with new authors, or I think I read in the article something about an Instagram party, and I don't even know how that would work, but read the article and maybe you'll get some ideas. So if you can offer some of these services to your local bookstores, it will help them sell your book. Okay, the spring 2020 children's flying starts. So in the June 26th edition of Publishers Weekly, oh, by the way, I created bit.ly links here, which you can see on the slides that go directly to these articles. But also, as I say every week, if you go to publishersweekly.com, you can subscribe for free to this entire magazine, the digital issue right now. It's normally a very expensive subscription. They're giving it away for free digitally. Definitely worth the 30 seconds it'll take you to go there and sign up for it. Spring 2020 Children's Flying starts in the June 26th edition of Publishers Weekly, profiles 6 of the season's spring's most promising children's and YA debut authors. So for those of you who are new to publishing, there are 2 big seasons where new books come out, spring and fall. Spring really includes spring and summer, fall really is fall and winter, but that's sort of when publishers release their new lists and reviewers, you know, it's sort of 2 big review cycles, etc. So this is from this spring and summer. And if you're an aspiring author, reading the stories of how new authors got their start is very educational. And it can give you a lot of good information on what you might do. It also is very inspiring because you are going to see how these authors also spent a long time revising their manuscripts, maybe had to work a while before they found an agent, maybe made some mistakes along the way that they learned from. So you can learn from what they learned. And so I always think it's a great idea to read interviews with authors, especially when they're hot out, you know, right out of the gate there, because they're just one step ahead of you right now. So again, I think you'll get a lot of inspiration from that. And finally, Bookends Literary Agency has 2 videos on their YouTube channel, 6 reasons why your query letter was requested and 6 reasons why your query letter was rejected. And the bit.ly link on the second one, I forgot to turn it blue, but it's bit.ly/6 reasons reject. And the other one is bit.ly/6 reasons request. Or you can just go to Bookends Literary Agency in YouTube, just Google Bookends and you'll see these videos come up. Anyway, they're really good. They'll tell you sort of the things you need to do right in your query letter and the things that a lot of people do wrong. And these are just great videos that the agents get together and make. They're very casual, kind of goof around a little bit, but very, very informative. Okay. Yay, now we're ready for Nick. So Nick, go ahead and turn on your camera and your microphone. I am really, really thrilled to have Nick Bruel here with us tonight.
Hello.
He's the author, hey Nick, he's the author and illustrator of New York Times best-selling Boing, as well as the Bad Kitty books, which to my count are probably getting up to around 30 different titles. Do you know how many Bad Kitty books there are out there, Nick?
It's an excellent question. I'm working on chapter book number 15.
Wow.
Which is already kind of shocking. Then there are 4 picture books, and I started doing these 8x8s. They call them 8x8s because they're 8 inches by 8 inches, and they fit nicely in spin racks. And I'm not sure how many of them there are, but about 7 or so, I think. Maybe 8.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, it's been kind of a nice run.
if you just go on Amazon and type in Bad Kitty, there's like 4 pages of the
Yeah.
books. And then there's different languages. It was really funny seeing the titles in different languages and stuff. And, you know, that's pretty cool.
What's fascinating about the language books is, you know, I have no control over the book. Well, you know, since you're talking shop here, you know, a foreign publisher, they purchase the rights to the book, right? So they can do whatever the heck they want with it. So they can not only change the language, they can change the title. They can hire a new artist if they so felt. So what I always find fascinating is how Bad Kitty is translated into other languages, especially those countries who choose to keep her name Bad Kitty.
Yeah.
So she's still Bad Kitty in Italy and in Germany. In Portugal, in Brazil, she's Gatinha, things like that. There's 2 different names for her in French, because there's the Quebecois French and the Parisian French. But
Wow.
I'll let you continue. I'm sorry.
No, that's a whole other conversation about having your books translated. And it never occurred to me that they could hire a different illustrator.
Absolutely. They buy the rights, so they can do whatever the heck they want with it. And they do change the titles, and they do change the language. I can't read them well enough to know, but great example is Germany. For Bad Kitty Gets a Bath, there's this moment where Kitty kind of disguises herself as Puppy in order to fool our narrator. And in my book, you know, the narrator says, you know, hey, Puppy, have you seen Kitty? And Kitty, disguised as Puppy, goes, duh, arf. But the German edition, the German version is was ist nicht Woof? Which so they actually give her a line. She actually says out loud, well, I'll be damned, woof, and goes from there.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Don't you wish you could speak all those languages so you could actually read exactly what each book says?
I would very much. And I do have friends who's, you know, living in New York. I have so many diverse friends who speak Chinese and Greek and German and French and such. And I do have them take a quick look-see sometimes if I get the editions in.
Yeah. Make sure they didn't change too much.
Well, when the British editions first came out, because they were in English, they consulted me quite a bit. This sort of surprised me. They actually consulted me with every manuscript they got, because they wanted to make easily 50, 60 changes in language for every book.
Wow.
Because there are certain things that I guess British children are going to be a little more familiar with than American children. And I approved maybe half of them, and the other half I just figured, you know what, the kids will get it from context. You just let them figure it out. I was working at a children's bookstore when the Harry Potter books came out, and kids, when it was revealed to them that the British editions were different than the American editions, that the American editions for the first 2, maybe 3 volumes were edited, there was a huge outcry from kids about that. So I thought, you know, so with every manuscript that progressed, I approved fewer and fewer of the changes.
Well, and this, we'll make this point, then we'll move on to the topic of the evening. But when I was a kid, well, my family lived in England for a while, and so most of the books I read were written by British authors, and I had no problem figuring out the words, what they meant, or the sort of norms of society that were maybe a little bit different from the American. It just didn't matter. I got it. You figure it out from the context, like you said, and it's, if the story's good, you know, that's all that matters. So
exactly. It's not like kids are going to be fooled into thinking that Hogwarts is somewhere in the Midwest, right?
Oh, I know.
It's a British, they know full well where it is. And kids had a good point.
Sure. And if a character says, I have to use the loo, you
Right.
figure out it means toilet,
Yeah.
and you just, yeah, exactly.
Doesn't mean lawnmower, right? I mean, so yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for that intro to another interesting topic. So we're going to talk about subversive children's book characters here. And when we were sort of discussing a little while back about this topic, you said that you had once had a conversation with Maurice Sendak.
That's right.
About this. Would you like to share that with us?
Sure. I mentioned a little bit ago that I worked at a children's bookstore. I worked at a bookstore called Books of Wonder in New York City. It's still there, although it may have just recently moved. I'm not sure. And I worked there for over 7 years. And pretty much during that time, anybody and everybody came through those doors as either authors and illustrators for events, or just as flat out customers. Like a regular customer was Shel Silverstein, and have you back on someday, because I have some amazing Shel Silverstein stories.
Cool.
But one day I answered the phone, and it was Maurice Sendak. He'd actually never come into the store. He lived in Connecticut, as we all know, and he was looking to speak with Peter, the owner, about a question he had on something Peter was commissioning him to do. And Peter was not there. In fact, he was out of the country. And for reasons I'll never really understand, but I heard he was prone to this, he decided to just sort of fall into a conversation with me. This would be easily 4 or 5 years before I'd have my own book published. But I was a sort of freelance cartoonist, and I was looking to publish at that time. But we just sort of slipped into conversation, and Maurice could be maudlin, right? He could be morose, and I think he was just sort of in a funny mood that particular day, and a kind of mood where he just wanted to talk to someone. So, I mean, his brother had died about 9 months prior, and Shel Silverstein, who I met, had died about 6 months prior. And I think he was just sort of feeling lonely. So we talked about anything and everything. And one of the things that came up was what made for a good children's book. And, you know, we were talking about the kind of books he liked to read, and the kind of books he liked to create, and the kind of books he wished he saw more of. And this is going to sound like I'm going to subvert the theme of your program, but I'm not. I suggested to him maybe the kind of books you think work are subversive books. And he said, no, that's not the word I'm looking for. And so we struggled for a few minutes about it. And the word we actually came up with was provocative. And the reason subversive didn't work, but provocative did in his eye, was because when you're creating something subversive, you're looking to undermine, potentially, the format or the genre, and that's never been his goal, and it's never been my goal since then. But when you create something that's provocative, you're creating something that's going to draw someone in. Now, what happens is that if you create something provocative and you drop something in, and it's actually, especially if it's successful in drawing people into your work, there are people who are going to interpret your intentions as being subversive.
Exactly.
That has certainly happened to him hundreds of times since the very beginning, and it's happened to me to a modest degree. I certainly wasn't intending to. I was taking Maurice's suggestion there. I was trying to be provocative. I was not trying to be subversive. But if I've learned anything in life, is that people who are looking to be outraged will always find something that will outrage them. And
that's very true. Yeah, and I was just thinking that as you were talking, that, you know, the creator's intent maybe is to be provocative, but from the outside. And it's very often the grown-up who sees this, if it's a children's book character, says that's subversive. They're trying to get my kids to think against, you know, the rules or authority or something like that. So, and definitely like Where the Wild Things Are, you know, one of the most banned children's books ever. And I think that's exactly why, because he was drawing kids in and having Max explore this inner world, inner emotions of a child who's angry. And the adults reading this are like, no, 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 no. You know, some adults,
Yeah.
they didn't like that. So Bad Kitty, you said you were intending for Bad Kitty to be provocative. Do you think she could even be called subversive, or is she just more cranky or, you know, very particular? Sort of, where is a line between just a provocative or a character who's just being authentically themselves with no apologies and subversive?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way of putting her, because what happened is I painted myself into a corner from the very get-go when I created this book, this picture book with the title Bad Kitty, never intending to create sequels to it or to have a series, much less even imagining that I would adapt her into chapter books only less than 3 years later. So the funny thing is, my original working title to Bad Kitty Gets a Bath was How to Give Kitty a Bath. And the wise salespeople at Roaring Brook Macmillan said, no, this is the same character. They're going to have to know this is the same character. So for all the titles, it's Bad Kitty. Bad Kitty Gets a Bath. Bad Kitty Meets a Baby. Bad Kitty versus Uncle Murray. Bad Kitty Goes on Vacation, right? Which comes out later. But, you know, inside the books, she is Kitty.
Mm-hmm.
And she will sometimes do something that is bad. She'll sometimes do something very bad intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
But very often, like as you say, she is being her cat-like self or childlike self, however you want to approach her.
Sure.
And the consequences are that she is perceived as being a bad kitty.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think what I love about her is that I don't think it really bothers her a whole lot that she's perceived as Bad Kitty. I mean, she kind of sort of learns her lesson, but then she forgets it right away, you know, at the end of each book. And you can tell she's going to move on to doing something bad in the next book again.
Well, that's a challenge. You're right, because it is a series, and
Sure.
and I don't want to. First of all, I think it would be very dull if I transform her completely by the time it wouldn't be believable. It's just as in terms of character arc, if she changes completely who she is. However, a lot of my challenge for every book is to find a way to take a character that I've used so many times and still create a sort of a character arc where she's a little bit different at the end than she was at the beginning, while still remaining herself. Right? I mean, that's maybe the only writing tip I have to offer to anybody who's watching this, is that, you know, your character at the end has to be different than the character at the beginning. Something has to have changed or affected him or her in some way, but it still has to be believable.
Right.
That is a big challenge every time for me with these books.
Yeah. And I think I'm thinking of Bad Kitty, but also any character like this, if the character is completely changed at the end so that they no longer have that edge to them that made them so appealing in the first place, I think your readers are going to be very disappointed. Yeah. And frankly, they're not going to want to read your next book because you will have let them down. You know, it is believable that she still retains that essence of herself, even if she figured out, maybe I shouldn't have done that thing, but we know she's going to go on to do something else, like I said, in the next book. And that's what I think makes her so appealing, and makes kids want to keep coming back.
Exactly. I mean, and kids will see right through it,
Oh
because
yeah.
what happens is if I create a book or a character who completely transforms and goes from being, lousy to angelic at the end, they're going to say, it's like, what kind of nonsense is this? I hear this all the time. My parents want me to be something that I'm not. So,
Mhm.
if here you've created a character that is going against everything that I believe in, and they're not going to buy into it, not for a second.
Mhm. Exactly. I see some of you have a few questions in the chat box. If you could put them in the Q&A box, which will either be at the bottom or the top of your screen, that way I can keep track of them, and we'll spend a few minutes toward the end here answering some of your questions. So some authors clearly go into a story intending to create something very subversive. I'm thinking of Roald Dahl, for
Yeah.
example. A lot of his books had this very satisfying justice to them, where the bad kids or the bad characters often got killed. I mean, they were just like, they got what they deserved. The good kids got what they deserved, but he did it in a very unique way. And then, a lot of those types of books were written a while back. They were from past generations. It seems to me today, maybe I am wrong, that you have to be a little more nuanced. Do you think there's room in publishing right now for that very clear good versus evil or overt subversion? I mean, we do have like Captain Underpants, stories like that, where these boys are just, they're out to cause trouble. They're not, there's no bones about it. This is their purpose in life. But it's also very funny. It's not quite as dark as Dahl could get, or Roald Dahl could get. So what do you think about that? Do you think that the publishing has changed? Do you think there's still room for those kind of really,
Well, I think
powerfully
with
subversive?
to make a broader point, I think our broad sensibilities may have changed, but what appeals to us may not have.
Mhm.
I don't want to lose track, but Roald Dahl's a fascinating guy, right? I mean, his books really are marvelous for everything that you said, because one of the things that Roald Dahl did brilliantly was that he wasn't afraid to go to the extremes
Right.
with his villains, or to the extremes with his awful children,
Mhm.
to a degree that I've always wondered, and I've never read a biography to find out whether he was familiar with the old Struwwelpeter poems, because those were really good examples. Do you know the Struwwelpeter story poems?
Mhm.
A man named Heinrich Hoffmann, in some ways, created the first children's book. He created it back, we're talking hundreds of years ago, and it was called Struwwelpeter, and translated into English, it was Shock-Haired Peter. And it was a collection of poems
Mhm.
that themselves subverted the norm, because kids' books, for the most part, then were these educational primers, right? Where kids had to learn good manners, as well as their numbers, as well as how to conjugate verbs in Latin. And, they were as dull as a dishwasher manual. So Heinrich Hoffmann comes along, and I hope I'm getting his first name right, and he creates these poems about awful kids, and they do stupid things, but they all get their comeuppance in the most gruesome ways, right? That would never be published today. Like, a little girl plays with matches, and the cats say to her, "Don't play with matches," right? And she says, "I don't care, I'm gonna play with matches." And of course she's set on fire, she runs around screaming until she burns into a pile of ashes, and the cats are crying. The end. But this book was so phenomenally successful that a good example is that if you ever find really old editions of it from like 200 years ago, chances are they were hand colored, because the color printing was too expensive and too slow. So Hoffman hired just teams of artists who would hand paint the pages, and before they were bound together. And by today's standards, they would be like Harry Potter times 10. in terms of how popular they just swept all around the world. And it makes me wonder if Roald Dahl was familiar with them, because he would create these extremely, wild characters, and he was not afraid to pull back, right? I mean, the gym teacher in Matilda kicks children over the chain link fence on the other side of the playground. That's pretty amazing. But the interesting thing is he would also create so that it wasn't just awful children, awful adults. He actually would create these angelic creatures. In terms of Matilda was sort of like an ideal child.
Yes.
With horrendous parents. Her English teacher who eventually adopts her is like the greatest teacher in the world, who's living in this horrible school. So he was really good at creating that contrast. And he even did it without making characters like Matilda or Charlie sappy.
No.
But those books would not have worked if not for going into the extremes. And to get to what you're saying about today's standards, I think they could. I think our sensibilities may have become nuanced in what we do, but kids themselves have not changed in terms of what appeals to them.
Correct.
Right? I mean, I was thinking about why characters like, would appeal to kids, and one example that came to me from my own childhood was not from books so much from Highlights magazine. Because every month in Highlights magazine there was Goofus and Gallant. There was no greater moralistic set of tales ever told than the stories of Goofus and Gallant, right? And I loved those. I didn't love it because of Gallant, who I'm sure was just a terrific guy. I mean, he always said please and thank you, right? I mean, he was the first one to go to Mother and say, how can I help prepare dinner? I will bring your dishes to the sink, right? I'm sure Gallant did very well for himself in life, but Goofus was the guy that really drew me into those stories. I mean, Goofus didn't say thank you. He put his feet up on the table. He wasn't finished watching TV. So he'll come down when he's ready. But yeah, you know what? This kind of behavior, even then I knew it shouldn't be encouraged, but Goofus, I feel you.
Yeah.
I see myself, and every kid in the world saw themselves in Goofus.
Well, and I think, yes, I completely agree. And I think too, as I remember as a kid myself, I would read those books or watch Looney Tunes cartoons. And the subversive characters were so appealing because I was not like that, and you almost lived vicariously. I knew that when my mom called me down to dinner, I had to show up. Then, there was you just stopped what you were doing and went down to dinner. But it was fun to read about kids who didn't, and it was like I got to live vicariously through that, so I didn't have to do it in my own life and get in trouble for it. And I wonder if there's something in our sort of collective psyche, especially as kids, where that is so appealing. As you were talking, I was thinking of those old Bugs Bunny cartoons and the Roadrunner and the Wile E. Coyote, who's always, there's always an anvil getting dropped on his head, and Elmer Fudd, who's always Bugs Bunny's always playing tricks on him. And those were so fun to watch as kids. And I think they satisfied something in us, some primal something or other that were touched on by those characters.
Well, Charles Schulz once talked about, I hope I'm getting it right, about Charlie Brown and Snoopy. And he always would say Charlie Brown is who he was, but Snoopy is who he wanted to be.
Right.
And I think we see that in the cartoons. And Looney Tunes, by the way, is a huge influence on the Bad Kitty books. It's
I can tell,
great influence as anything else out there. but yeah, there's just a certain freedom
Yeah.
that is exhibited in characters like Bugs Bunny and Snoopy, and I guess to a lesser degree with Kitty, it's the freedom to be pretty much who they are, and without being controlled. Which I think, to get back to how you introduce this, is perhaps the big appeal of Max in Where the Wild Things Are, and what Sendak was touching on, because for a guy who never raised children directly himself, he certainly understood the psychology of kids as well, if not better than most adults who ever created works for children. And I think he saw that in the psychology of kids, the thing that they have to fight against the most is the battle over being controlled, because that's what you're used to doing as a parent. I mean, I have a 12-year-old daughter, and it's really coming to a head these days, right? As babies, we carry them around, we completely control them. The second they start walking, it gets harder to control them. And as soon as they start talking and walking, all bets are off. And the certain amount of control that we try to impose upon, we try to have with our kids, starts to feel more and more like an imposition to them.
Right.
And so that's in some ways one of the things I bear in mind when I'm creating the bad stories about Kitty, because she is, of course, a child shaped like a cat,
right,
with cat-like attributes to make it so that she's not just another Arthur, who is, whatever animal he was based on, that animal side of Arthur had long been erased.
Oh yeah.
Those are characters who are basically children with animal-like features, but not animal-like facets.
Yes, exactly. And that's another interesting topic we'll have to have you back for.
Right.
Creating those animal characters. But you're right about the control. And it's interesting, when I first started publishing the newsletter, Alison Lurie, L-U-R-I-E, for those of you who want to know this author's name, who was an educator and a writer, and she wrote this book called Don't Tell the Grown-Ups, Subversive, I can't remember the subtitle now, Subversive Children's Literature, something like that, but the main title is called Don't Tell the Grown-Ups. And I interviewed her in one of an early issues of our newsletter, and it was a fascinating book. It was all about this topic.
Wow.
But she went all the way back to Peter Rabbit, and she said Peter was a subversive character. And I don't know if Beatrix Potter meant to write him that way, but the fact that he was told to stay out of the garden, and he went into the garden anyway, and kids always, she said, whenever she read that book to kids, even though Peter was punished at the end, he went to bed without his supper, and all his sisters got blueberries, I think, or berries for supper. Kids, and she would say to them, which rabbit do you want to be? And kids would always say Peter, because he's the one who had the adventure. And it's like, it's okay if he got punished at the end, but he's the one who had the fun. And she went through all kinds, the Cat in the Hat, of course, the cat, oh my God, and all these classic characters. Why do you think grown-ups get so disturbed by this? Or some grown-ups, not all, but enough to get these books banned all the time, on all these banned book lists. Why is it so scary for parents to read a book to their kids where a character goes on an adventure even though he's not supposed to, or the cat comes in and creates a mess, and then at the end, Dr. Seuss says, basically implies, don't tell mom the cat was here, she'll never know and it'll be fine. It's a book. Why is this so scary to the grown-ups?
Well, first of all, to the point about Peter Rabbit, let's not forget, he also loses his tail.
He does. He does pay a price for the adventure.
So he's got a whole body part that's lopped off, and still think
True,
that
I
guy's
forgot about the tail.
You know what I mean? Like, he's the kid who, yeah, all right, he wasn't supposed to ride his bike down the hill, but he's got this boss scar on his arm now to show for it. That's okay. So, well, you know, I think what happens is, you know, all grown-ups were themselves kids once, right?
Sure.
And there is an argument that we sort of forget what it was like to be kids. And I think in terms of why they try, well, there are two different things here at play. I mean, why grown-ups disagree with a topic, and why they try to get a book outright banned or censored are kind of two different areas, because
Right.
the banned and censored thing, that's just a, that's usually has an inference. They believe an author like myself has some sort of hidden agenda that's within the book, or even an outward agenda that they agree with they disagree with so egregiously on either a political or social level that they don't want anybody to look at it. For grown-ups who find a topic disagreeable, that they just don't, that they dislike the character of the book, it often, I couldn't actually say, because I don't know if I've ever found a book that I personally found so disagreeable that I wouldn't let my child add it for its content, and you know, in terms of children's books. I have to think about that for a moment. Why?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess the whole thing is that, you know, is what we were talking about, is that, you know, a book can be interpreted as being subversive, and
Yeah.
change can be scary, and,
Right.
and creating something that can have a more that they think can have a profound effect on their child. Even when you think reasonably for a moment, that's just simply not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
There is no book ever made, ever written, ever created that's going to have more impact than the parent who raised the child. I guess maybe the answer to that is maybe people think that books have more power to them than is actually true.
Yeah, well, and I think you touched on it when you talked about the control, and I know I'm a parent too, and I know that my son's 24 now, so I can tell you will survive the teenage years. I'm glad I'm on the other end, but it is scary, you know, to have to let them go, you know, little by little. And I think that especially for the real young kids, it's parents being scared of their kids going somewhere in their imagination by themselves, without the parent right there telling him what to think, you know. And I think that can be scary. And to me, that's one of the greatest gifts a book can give a child, is that they get to go unencumbered in their imagination through this book and experience it however they choose to experience it, without a grown-up telling them.
I think we sometimes underestimate a child's ability to distinguish imagination from reality.
I agree.
Children will embrace their imagination, and they may, in fact, prefer their imagination to reality, and I think most grown-ups should too. Mm-hmm. But they can distinguish it pretty clearly, and a great example are the Looney Tunes, right? A lot of Looney Tunes were, you know, they were cleaned up because they thought children were going to hurl themselves off of cliffs like coyotes, and that simply did not happen, right? You know, goodness knows there probably was some kid somewhere who played Roadrunner and Coyote on a fence, and the kid broke his arm and ruined it for all the rest of us. But that really, you know, because as grown-ups, we simply don't have the opportunity to play like we once did. We don't get to exercise our imaginations. And kids who do play, and they relish playing, they need play, as the Obies are always reminding us, they can better distinguish the reality from their playtime and imagination exercise. better than we give them credit for.
I agree. I agree. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, well, that's another topic. I'm not going to go there tonight. I was going to take us off on a tangent.
Already, right?
No, but just talking about imagination, this is not a subversive thing, but it just reminded me when my son was, I don't know, 4, 5 years old, one of his favorite books was William Steig's Pizza Pizza.
Brilliant.
And yeah, and it's where this boy Pete, for those of you who haven't read it, it's raining out, he's bored, so his father decides to make him into a pizza. And it's just this game he plays, and they make him into a pizza, pretending, of course. And Matt, my son's, his bedtime routine every night for about a year consisted of us making him into a pizza. He could not go to bed.
Pepperoni slices, like in the book?
We did the slices. We did, just like in the book, it was shredded paper that we threw all over him for the cheese.
That's great.
We had to put him in the oven, which was the sofa. We had to do the whole book every night. Now, he didn't actually think he was a pizza.
No.
Obviously, this was his imagination, but that's just, he found it so delightful that became his routine for quite a while. So it's interesting which books stick with which kids. You just never know what's going to hit, which I just think is fascinating too.
That book is really special, and it came so late in his career, which is remarkable as well. And it's such a standout, no matter who did it. But just it's such a great Steig book, and so different from everything else he did. What I think that book does is it has layers to it that aren't obvious in the text or the illustration. And if you read. You just described the plot line of, Dad decides to play with Junior to pretend that he's a pizza. But the underlying theme to that book is it's about shared play. It's not that they're playing a game. It's that Dad is sharing in this game with a Junior. And I think the best, and that is so hard to as an author, I try to do that. I really do try to create some sort of underlying theme that will give it strength beyond its plot line, and that's so hard. Where the Wild Things does that as well, and I think I actually did talk to Maurice about this, because to me that book, a lot of people interpret it as sort of freedom and liberty and being a wild thing and being uncontrolled id. But at the end, it's not until the very last page you realize that book is about forgiveness.
Yes. Because
Max comes back from the world of Wild Things, and the first thing he sees is the supper that they denied him early. They sent him upstairs without it, and it was still warm.
Yep.
And that is the beauty of that particular book, and I think Pizza Pizza does something similar, just in terms of creates a beautiful scene, but it's about this the shared play between Junior and Dad that makes it just an absolute gem.
Yep, I agree. Yeah. And those books are deceptively simple, but when you really start looking at them, they have those layers, and kids see that when you're reading it to them. And I think that's what makes those books so powerful for them. They get it. They get that layer. Yeah. Well, I have some good questions here. All right. Well, first of all, someone asked if you would write a book about all of your encounters with these interesting authors that you had when you were at the bookstore. Are you ever going to compile those stories together?
Oh, it's interesting. Many of those authors are still alive and acquaintances of mine, certainly. So there are some things that I probably couldn't tell without their direct permission. Because there are so many, I'll come back for a Shel Silverstein day if you ever want to do, and I'll tell some great Shel Silverstein tales.
I love that.
I can't think of any that would, other than Shelley's, that would really bring in an audience of readers. You know, I mean, for the most part, it was, you know, just either, you know, just polite conversation, or for the most part, just helping them sign books and such. I will say that within the industry, certainly early on, once I started getting published myself, I feel like I became known as the guy who went from one side of the table to the other, because I ran a lot of those signing events. And then once I actually started making my own books and started signing books and such, it was really quite lovely how other authors came up to me, remembering me from my days at Books of Wonder, and how I would help them, you know, sign stock and such. And Robert Sabuda, really the greatest paper engineer that ever lived, gave me this huge hug at my first book expo. You know, like 15, 16 years ago, and said to me, like, you know, welcome to the fold, he said. John Agee, yeah, I know, John Agee, you know, remembered me very well, and he was saying, it's you know, so happy to have you around on this side of things, you know. Mo Willems, even before I left Books of Wonder, because I was still there for about 5 months after my first book came out. He was doing sort of a stock signing tour, and he was at the very tail end of it when he came into the store to sign copies of I think Knuffle Bunny, which had just won yet another Caldecott honor for him. And he, you know, without my really I never told him that I had a book coming out, and I didn't think he would ever remember me in any way. He started telling me about all the stores that he'd visited where he saw my book Boing on display, which was really very, very sweet of him. So, you know, that's, I don't think I have really enough for a book, but I will say that, you know, 99% of the authors and illustrators that I have engaged with over the years, and most of them I've engaged with because of my book selling days, and not so much of what I do now, because like the rest of us, I just work by myself inside my office, have been absolutely just spectacular people. Some of the most decent, lovely, you know, people I've ever known. Couple pills, we're not all perfect. But really, just people I'm just so fortunate to have met, and in some cases really come to know well.
Yes. Well, I've been in this business for 34 years, and I'm always amazed at how many just genuinely nice people populate the children's book industry. You know, editors, agents, art directors, authors, illustrators, of course, and even booksellers, librarians. The list goes on and on and on. It's really wonderful.
It's a cool crowd. I mean, we're talking about people who devote themselves to what I think is a pretty noble craft, and that is literature for kids. And I think people who are going to devote themselves to that kind of thing are by nature organically going to be kind of neat people. You know, imagine, you know, what it would be like if you know, going to kid book and kid literature conferences is always just a joy. Imagine if you had to do the same thing for, like, you know, used car salesman. It'd be a very different vibe.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Mo Willems, and you know, the pigeon won our poll today.
I saw that.
Yes, and that is like a straight up subversive character right there. And I thought the brilliance of those books is that Mo Willems puts the reader in charge of the pigeon. And so the pigeon gets to be subversive. The reader has to tell him, no, no, no. But the reader gets to laugh because the pigeon's doing stuff that the reader probably would be doing himself in the same situation. And it's just so brilliant the way those books are constructed. Yeah. And I have never met a kid who didn't love those books. So.
Well, they're great read alouds. They read aloud, you know, extremely well.
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
And that, by the way,
Um,
is
mhm.
the not, I wouldn't say the model, but it's sort of the my goal as well with the Bad Kitty books is people ask me sometimes, or kids ask me, how come you never see Kitty's owner? And the illusion I try to create, because I'm all of my copies in second person, not first or third, as I'm trying to create the illusion that you, the reader, are Kitty's owner, and it's like you're talking directly to Kitty
Yes.
yourself.
Yes.
And yeah, I don't know if I'm successful with that illusion, but that's certainly the goal.
I can see kids getting that. I'm just thinking of like kindergartners, first graders who are starting to read and they can read that book on their own. I can see them just loving to read it out loud so that they get to be talking to Kitty.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple good questions here about sort of your process.
Oh, all right.
Put on your writer hat here. Let's see. Well,
I'm actually sitting at my desk, right? And I'm working on a new book, so I can actually show you a little bit. And this
awesome.
is just by, happy coincidence.
Sure.
Okay, because I write and illustrate the stories, obviously first things first is I come up with a concept that I think can work. So for instance, and then I will take pieces of paper, everything that's within hand, and I will just start writing down ideas that I will paperclip together. And I'm not trying to do it sequentially. I just, any interesting idea that can work with this concept, I start putting down. So for instance, all right, this is a little bit of breaking news. So the book I'm working on right now, this would be for a release in 2022, I guess, is a Bad Kitty Gets a Phone. So I get this idea. I love this idea of Bad Kitty, because what can I do with it? I start writing everything down. Eventually I take all those ideas, I put them in order, I make an outline. My outline is very detailed. For an outline, this is 15 pages single spaced. Wow. And it's going to include probably 80% of the copy that's going to appear in the book. Then, once I have it all mapped out with my outline, I take sheets of paper, and because my books are sort of, they're loosely 8 inches tall, 5 1/4 wide, they fit 2 pages, fit very nicely in a spread. So I take just regular printer paper, and I just start sketching out every idea, my chapter. But I'm writing and drawing at the same time now, because I have a character, my protagonist is mute. She does not speak. So a lot of what I'm going to be saying to her, she has to respond in pantomime. Then I measure out the paper properly, and this is going to be my final paper, the final illustrations I'm going to be doing, and I pencil it all out. Right? I'm doing this because I didn't used to, but I finally got wise about 10 years ago. If I pencil everything out on the final paper I'm going to be doing, then I don't have to, do any tracing or redoing. I save myself literally 2 months of time. But I keep it in pencil. I pencil the whole thing out until which I will then scan on my cheap old printer scanner and lay out myself, because then my editor can see the full manuscript with everything typed out, all the copy drop down, and all the penciled illustrations on the paper, so that if there are any changes to the illustrations, I can erase, I can make adjustments. And it isn't until after everything's been approved that I take the same paper with the same penciled illustrations and I apply inks. And it used to be that I did this on watercolor paper, because after I put ink down, I would do sort of monochromatic grays on the paper for scanning. But starting this January, the books are coming out in color. That they're hiring some people who are much more brilliant than me when it comes to color theory to drop the color in digitally. So now all I have to do is the line art.
Oh, wow.
And I give it to them to drop in the color. I loosely supervise if there's something's not right or doesn't quite fit. We talk about it, but I don't have to do the color anymore.
Wow.
Not painting anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
I paint the
Because
color.
originally they were black and white. Your
Well, they're black and whites and grays, but all of those illustrations were hand painted. I mean, I used different dilutions of Payne's gray, Winsor Newton Payne's gray, that I would paint every single one of those pages. Kitty herself would be the sort of jet black wash to really make the black stand out from everything else. But that was, you know, in terms of the actual art, finished art, that, you know, was half the process. Penciling plus inking probably was as much time as the actual painting process. Yeah. Now I don't have to do that, but to make up for any spare time I might have once had, I'm going back and re-illustrating all of the original books one at a time, because they want to re-release all of those in color. The first 3 come out in January, because they discovered that no matter what they did with Photoshop and filtering and such, they could not remove all of my grays that I hand painted in to leave just the clean black lines.
Wow.
So in order to do it, I'm doing all the line art all over again for books that I handed in as much as 12, 13 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So all of those original illustrations that you hand painted, do you still have the original art, or is
I
it?
still have them. They're all piled up in a storage room and downstairs that there's just falling over on themselves right now. I filled up my flat files like 8 years ago. Stacked up on top of each other.
Well, those will be worth something. For sure, for sure. So if someone is not an illustrator, do you think it's a good idea, if they're doing a picture book, to just sketch out the pictures, even if they're doing stick figures, just so they can envision how the action might flow as they're creating their manuscript? They obviously wouldn't turn that into a publisher, but do you think that's a good exercise for someone who's a writer?
I don't think it could hurt, but you know, I think it really depends on. I don't have any personal insight into this because I've never written something for someone else to illustrate. But I have asked something similar in terms of what I can't remember. Wendy Mass, maybe. What do you do as somebody writes? And she did not. And she did not try to envision the book graphically in any way. And now, possibly because she tended to use sort of a verse to tell her to write her manuscripts. Her manuscripts are more poetry than prose. But she really wanted to focus on creating what she would feel would be just a good story and good copy for someone else to and you know, graphically envision and create. In comic books, there used to be 2 schools of thought, because there was the DC school and the Marvel school of comic book writers. And the DC school was simply writing a script, like it would look like a screenplay, you know, Batman, Robin, you know, maybe page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, leave it at that. The Marvel school was that the writer would actually create frames with simple sketches and stick figures and such like that. And obviously these are 2 different schools that had 2 very successful results.
Right.
So I couldn't say what would be better. All I can say is I consider myself very, very fortunate that I have the opportunity to write and illustrate my stuff.
And I'm sure each writer will sort of figure out what works best for them if they need to create some sort of visual component just as they're writing their story, just to help them with the pacing or whatever. But it's I didn't know that about the two different schools of thought with DC and Marvel. That's very interesting.
I took one of the few writing courses I ever took was one taught by a man who just passed away. His name is Denny O'Neil. He was a brilliant editor at DC Comics for decades. He revitalized Batman in the 70s. And he was the one who told me this, but he probably taught me storycraft better than any teacher I had ever had prior to him. And so even though it was a class on writing for comic books, the text he had us use and read was Writing the Screenplay by Sid Field. Sid spelled S-Y-D. And I think I probably learned more about just how a story in general is crafted taking this class than I did from anything else I did in college. And in gratitude, I suppose, after I learned he passed away only about a month ago, he is one of the people I dedicate the next Bad Kitty book to. Mm-hmm. Because he was masterful teacher, and he certainly taught me a lot. In fact, Bad Kitty Drawn to Trouble uses some of the language of telling a story that was taught to me by Denny, and that's used in Sid Field's Writing the Screenplay. So things like the MacGuffin and plot points, mm-hmm. those only appear in the Sid Field books, and that were passed on to me by Denny. But I think they are absolutely crucial writing techniques that are necessary for whatever you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's great. You know, I've had other writers tell me they learned so much from taking screenwriting courses or reading books on writing screenplays, and they transfer that to their book writing. And I think that's fascinating, but I'm going to have to read that particular Bad Kitty book again and look for those things. So, and I'm not going to keep you too much longer. I know it's late where you are. I appreciate you sticking around with us here. Joan asks, how did you come up with Kitty as a character? And I will add to that another question about creating your process for developing humor in the story. Did they go hand in hand, your concept and the humor?
Well, to answer the Kitty question first, I use a creative device when I want to come up with just story ideas in general, in that I think of the titles first before I think of anything else. That was true for Boing. That was true for Bad Kitty. It's even true for a lot of the Bad Kitty chapter books, where I just think of even before concept, if I think something like Happy Birthday Bad Kitty, what can I do with that? Mm-hmm. So the simple story about how I came up with the idea for Bad Kitty was I was sitting in my little apartment one day and doing that sort of creative device where, rather than trying to come up with a story idea, rather than writing down the words "once upon a time," fill in the blank.
Right.
I just started writing down interesting titles, 2-word titles, 1 or 2-word titles. And as I was writing them down, I wrote down the words Bad Kitty. And I like titles that sound good out loud, and that one sounded great out loud. I worked at a children's bookstore, and after all those years there, I'd never seen a book called Bad Kitty, and it sounded like it might be interesting. So I started asking myself questions. Mm-hmm. Which is really the key to how to write any story. And the question being, all right, I've got a cat doing something bad. What does she do that's so horrible? And I started writing down those ideas, and I came up with so many ideas. I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if I wrote them down in alphabetical order? Mm-hmm. Okay. Then I asked the next important question, which was, okay, why would she do all these terrible things? And with, cats, food, behavior, pretty closely linked. So I thought, okay, I'll do another alphabet about foods that she gets that she doesn't like, and see where I can go from there. And I want to see how far I could do. And more or less, that's how the first Bad Kitty book took shape.
Right.
As for humor, I think I've tried writing serious stuff. I've tried to be, you know, really somber and writing sort of short stories, and really came to the conclusion that it just wasn't me. When I was a kid growing up, I was certainly not the brightest kid, so I didn't hang out with the smart kid group. I was not an extroverted kid, right? So I didn't hang out with the class clowns, for instance. You know, I just didn't. I was not an athletic kid, right? I had the perfect physique for somebody who would eventually grow up to write and illustrate children's books. So I didn't hang out with the athletes or the sports kids. I was kind of a witty kid. I found that I could make friends not by being goofy, but by being, you know, funny, witty. You know, getting into a conversation where there was good pattern. And so those are the kind of stories I like to write, where there's good fun and there's some pretty funny dialogue. And I will say this to kids sometimes who ask me, hey, well, how come you write funny books in the first place? How come you don't write somber, you know, soulful tales? And it's just like, well, you know what? When I was a kid, that's how I made friends. And so I write funny books now so I can become friends with my readers. Mm-hmm. And I actually believe that sincerely. Mm-hmm. Humor is universal. Doesn't matter what language you speak. Doesn't matter where you come from or what challenges you face. Humor is something that draws us all in and draws us towards each other. So this is why I try to use it as much as I can. Being funny and being consistently funny is always a challenge, because it's not for me to define whether something is funny. It's up to my readers. And so far, so good. They still find my stuff funny. This is where an editor comes in. You know? If I'm off the mark, if I'm not doing it, she doesn't find it. She's not finding it funny. She thinks it doesn't work. I listen.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you think if you're writing humor, you're just really writing what you think is funny, and then you're relying on your editor to tell you if that translates beyond your brain, basically?
Well, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create something that's going to fit my sensibility. As much as I'm trying to take my audience and the age of my audience into consideration, because I don't want to drop something completely inappropriate, because there's certainly inappropriate stuff that I find funny that I won't put in my books. I'm still trying to be true to what I consider to be the kind of things I find amusing and sensible and works. And there are certainly loads of things that I think kids may find funny that I might not. I try not to get scatological with my humor, because it doesn't necessarily appeal to me. And I think it's sometimes a crutch in terms of what authors will use to convey humor to kids. And I don't think every kid is going to find that, you know, fart jokes necessarily funny, you know. A lot of kids do. I mean, you know, my daughter was a stand-up comedian when she was 4 years old, and she was going boop, 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 and she broke the house.
Right.
But it doesn't necessarily work all the time. So yeah, I rely on my editor to a great degree to tell me if I'm missing the mark. If she tells me I missed the mark, I listen to her. No question about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's where editors really earn their money, right there.
Well, I'll give you a really good example. Years ago, I came up with this idea for Bad Kitty, where it was going to be her third book. And the idea is that the owners have left for reasons undisclosed. And so they hired this sweet little old lady come into the house to house sit, pet sit, I guess, Kitty and Puppy. And Kitty and Puppy do their usual shenanigans, and the old lady gets all caught up in it, and she's just tormented for 144 pages. And I handed that outline into my editor, the brilliant Neil Porter, and he said to me, it's just not funny. Tormenting an old lady, it may be cute for a moment, but then it's just, for a whole book, it does not work. And I looked at it and I go, oh man, it's right. And I was thinking I just disposed of it completely then, but suddenly hit me. It's like, wait a minute. Kitty and Puppy, Kitty especially, tormenting an old lady doesn't work. But if Kitty's tormenting Uncle Murray, that's comedy gold. So I did make some significant plot changes, but for the most part, the events that happen in the book remained the same. I just took out the old lady and changed it to Uncle Murray, and became Bad Kitty versus Uncle Murray, and it was it was a success. It worked well.
Interesting,
Yeah.
because as you were talking, I was going to say we started early on talking about Roald Dahl and sort of what he did. And I was thinking as you were talking, would Roald Dahl think that tormenting an old lady was going too far? And he might have. I think he might have made the same choice you did. It depends who is the foil on the other end of the sword there. You have to pick the right character. And, you know, why do you think it worked with Uncle Murray? What it is about Uncle Murray that makes it okay for Kitty to torment him?
That's an excellent question. I don't know if I have a succinct answer to that. Other than, you know, Uncle Murray, first of all, he was already a character that was loosely familiar to kids. Mm-hmm. He first appears in the very first Bad Kitty book as this, among this sort of array of animals that Kitty wants to eat. And Uncle Murray, who's just consistently sort of dumbfounded by the events around him, he goes, who? What are you talking about, right? So the fact that I used him for the fun facts in Bad Kitty Gets a Bath, and then again in Happy Birthday, kind of made him a familiar presence, so that I could use him, and kids kind of had even if for those kids who were familiar with him, they had a sense of what to expect with him. But you know what? You can't assume that. Kids will, especially with the Bad Kitty books, I prepare each and every one of them for a kid who can walk into them for the very first time, and not have to read them sequentially. So for to do it with Uncle Murray, I think he was funny because he is a goofball, and an old lady would be an innocent, right? She would be perceived as a victim by the reader. Whereas, you know, Uncle Murray, he's like Elmer Fudd, right? Or Yosemite Sam. And he would, and you know, you don't get perturbed by how Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck treat them, because you know their goofiness is gives them a certain appeal, but not so much that you're disturbed by the events that transpire around them.
It also gives them a bit of a shield to what's the torment. You know, it kind of bounces off them a little bit more than an innocent. I think you really hit the nail on the head there. You don't want to torment an innocent. That's just mean. But, you know, goofy.
And the message of that book is that Uncle Murray, towards the end, he pushes back. He said, the whole message in that book is basically, you know what, Cat, I don't know why you're like this, but I'm a nice guy. I'm here to take care of you. I'm here to take care of the dog. I'm going to be here for a little while, whether you like it or not. No matter what you do, you know what? I'm going to be here to take care of you because that's my role. In so many ways, Uncle Murray is the moral center of my books. And I don't think the books a lot of them simply would not work without him. I'm very fond of that character. Yeah,
that is so true. Wow. So many layers to Uncle Murray. That's great. Okay, I'm gonna let you go here. We've been here a long time and I still have some great questions, but we'll have to have you back because this was just awesome. Very, very, and well, two things I just have to tell you here from the Q&A. First of all, Sharon says Sid Field was a close friend of hers.
Wow.
And so she just wanted you to know that.
Oh, well, I am in his debt. And so thank you for sharing that.
And she says she also recommends his book all the time to script writers as well as children's book writers. So,
Sure.
and why don't you tell us the title of his book again in case people
Well, he's
want
got
to.
two. Writing the screenplay is the first one comes to mind, and I can't quite. I mean, your participant can probably tell the title. It might just be Art of the Screenplay, art something like that.
Mhm.
He's got two that are from. I think the one that we read was Writing the Screenplay, but I think he has another one that might be Art of the Screenplay. I can't remember.
Mhm.
Those are his most famous ones. I think he's got
Okay,
even more
great.
than those, but they may not all be in print.
Right. Well, it's Sid, S-Y-D, Field, F-I-E-L-D. So you
That's
guys
right.
can look up. Oh, here she says, she just added this here. Yes, screenplay, Art of the Screenplay. So, and getting lots of people saying, thank you for this program. So my very last question, someone asked if you could
Sure.
please spell the name of that old German book of poems that you mentioned
Okay.
at the very beginning.
Sure. First of all, it's in print. Dover, I believe, puts it out still. It's called Struwwelpeter. Struwel, maybe another L, Peter. And it translates loosely. When it was translated into English and it became a huge success in England, it was titled Shock-Haired Peter. But the copy, if you were to find it, even though it would, all the poems would be written in English, the title would still be Struwwelpeter. And it's in many ways, it was such an immense success in Europe for literally centuries. There would be dozens and dozens of parody books that would come out. So during World War II, an extremely successful book was Struwwel Hitler, which was a sort of an anti-Nazi collection of poems using those characters and those poems. And getting back to Looney Tunes, one of the most fascinating poems in there is a poem about a nearsighted hunter who goes out hunting for a rabbit, and he sees a rabbit, but the rabbit outsmarts the hunter, steals the gun, steals his glasses, steals his hat, and actually starts hunting the hunter. And I've always been curious if there was any aspect of that ancient poem that would go on to inspire what would be the Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd cartoons.
It had to. I mean, how could it not?
I looked into it a little bit, especially since Bugs Bunny just turned 80 years old in the past week, and I was just reading it, and it's a whole other topic of conversation, and it might have inspired a sort of sensibility, but there were, rabbit hunting was a really common pastime.
True.
And interesting thing about Bugs Bunny, he's most famous. He was more or less created in a cartoon called The Wild Hare, where he became gray and white and how. But that cartoon was almost a complete remake of a Daffy Duck cartoon that had come out about a year prior to it, which has almost all of the same gags.
Mm-hmm.
But with slightly different dialogue and, of course, different characters. So it went from there was a duck hunting cartoon that became a rabbit hunting cartoon. So it makes me wonder, maybe not. I don't know.
There's so many interesting things in your head that all connect somehow. I just think this is fascinating.
Well, it's the sort of blessings and pitfalls of geekdom. There's so many things that I try to immerse myself in.
Oh. All right. Well, just our very helpful viewers here. Sid Field's book is called The Screenwriter's Workbook. That's what at least one of them Pamela put in the chat box. And I have a spelling of Struwwel. How did you say it? How do you pronounce it?
Struwwelpeter.
Yes. Rona says Struwwelpeter.
All right. One L.
Okay. And then Beth said, if you just type STRU into Google, it
Oh yeah.
popped
Oh
up.
yeah. It's obviously it's ancient, so that it's a public domain material. So I'm certain there are PDFs you can instantly download.
Oh yeah. We'll have to have a whole social just picking that apart, maybe analyzing
It
that.
was a critically important book in the history, in the annals of children's literature. So much of what we do today really kind of came from that book in particular, because
Mhm.
everything prior to it was, I'm hardly a historian, but everything for the most part prior to it were just sort of, educational in content, moralistic in content, although this one was moral, or often biblical in content. And this was a book that existed purely, even though it had these sort of heavy set, moral tales, to amuse children. So, and its extraordinary success pretty much told anyone who wanted to profit from printing material that creating something strictly for the purpose of amusing children rather than teaching them their numbers and letters and biblical tales had appeal
Mhm.
and could work.
Mhm.
And it was also an interest. I'd love to know that this history. Leonard Marcus he'd be able to go on about it for
Oh
days,
yeah.
I'm sure. But it was not intended to last. The paper they printed these books on was so cheap that it was like newsprint. They more or less disintegrated after a year or two. To my knowledge, the earliest known edition that still exists, it's like the 17th edition, the 17th printing, because they just disintegrated after, several reads.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. You're right. Leonard Marcus would be, I bet he knows all about this. I have to get him on
Oh,
here.
no question. Yeah.
Talk about geeking out on Kidlit. That would be a great person to do that with.
Anita
For sure.
Sylvie also, I'm sure she would also be
Oh
able to
yeah.
tell a ton about this one.
Yes. Yes. Good.
But
Good.
it's a worth a read. All your participants should read it just to know what it was like
Yeah.
then. It's
Yeah.
a phenomenal set of poems.
Oh, oh, cool.
Now,
Okay, that's your homework, everyone.
brace yourself, because you're not, just when you think it get crazy, it gets
Yeah.
crazy.
But it really brings us full circle in this discussion, because you said, putting this out just to entertain kids was a novel idea. And you talked about being provocative when you approach your characters, much more than just thinking I'm going to write something subversive. And
Right.
really, that was a very provocative idea back then, was to create something purely for entertainment.
Right.
Because it was a big deal to have a book. Not everybody had books in their house, and not everybody, maybe that's why they printed it so cheaply, so it was more accessible to lots of people.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a commercial success.
Yes.
And its success on the commercial level is kind of what brought it, made it successful as well, even though it was interesting in its content, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I did anything provocative or first-timey in any way, my thing was that I took a picture book character and I adapted her into a chapter book character.
Yes.
That hadn't really been done so much. And I came up with that notion thanks to working at a children's bookstore, where I didn't see that done. And I never understood why. I figured there must be a reason. I just didn't know what it was. So when the opportunity came for me to do something more with my character, I thought, you know what? This alphabet format I created is completely untenable. Let me see what my editor and my publisher are going to say to my adapting her into chapter books. And they love the idea.
Mm-hmm.
My editor, Neil Porter, I owe him so much, and Simon Boughton, they love the idea. And I guess sales, maybe they like the idea, but then it stopped. Nobody else did. Barnes & Noble didn't want to carry the first Bad Kitty chapter book. They just, at all.
Wow.
And the story goes, they were convinced to pick up, I think, 1,000 or maybe 1,500 copies for the entire chain. And there were many more stores then, and the online. And which they did reluctantly, and the rest is history.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
And I wonder if they thought kids who maybe had read Bad Kitty when they were younger thought, oh, these are going to be babyish book. They're not,
Well,
not
there were
gonna
two things going on with Barnes and Noble. The first was that it's partly that was, but first of all, there were two different buyers, right? Barnes and Noble is such a huge company. I don't know if it's still the case, but there was a picture book buyer and a store and a chapter book and an older buyer. And the chapter book and older buyer simply wasn't familiar with the picture book. So the question was, why? Why would any kid who knows this character as a picture book character or resume, why would that kid want to read the chapter book?
Right.
Now, my logic at the time, and when I think it's since borne out, was that I liked the scenario of my character growing up with her reader. That's why I like the idea of yeah, I think a kid who does know the picture book is in fact going to want to read the chapter book because now they've grown into that age range. Let's see what happens. Since then, of course, the chapter books have taken on a life of their own, and a lot of kids have no idea that there ever was a picture book or there are these picture books, which is I'm fine with, right? But to Barnes and Noble, their reasoning was there's no link. There's no. I wanted to create a bridge from picture book to chapter book with that. But of course, I'm stopping there. I'm not going any older than
Right.
the chapter book format that I created. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Kitty lends herself very well to chapter books. I think it would be difficult to go into middle grade with Bad Kitty. I mean, you could, but you'd have to really give her more. She'd have to grow up a lot. She'd have to become a teenager.
Potentially. I don't, and I have other ideas for writing middle grade fiction that I hope I can explore at some point anyway. But yeah, I don't know if an idea really struck me that I felt could work, I will explore that. I will move on. But I don't see it happening. I just don't.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
And there actually was precedence because after I did this with Bad Kitty, I did realize that another author had done a picture book to middle grade leap. She could be another Hoffman, Mary Hoffman, perhaps. She did a beautiful picture book called Amazing Grace. And then she took that character and she made a flat out non-illustrated middle grade novel about the same character. But I don't think readers ever really made the connection. And I don't think the novel ever held up in terms, certainly commercially, to the picture book, which was very well regarded.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and I think with the chapter books, like you said, it doesn't matter if kids make the connection because the chapter books stand on their own just fine.
Yeah, they do now. I did no way would I ever anticipate that the chapter I would be working on my 15th in the series. Never, not 100 years would I imagine I would have gotten this far.
It's a good surprise to have.
Yeah.
All right, Nick. Well, thank you so much. We've kept you a long time here, but it's been a delightful conversation. Fascinating.
Thank you for
People
having me.
are putting in the chat box that this has been their favorite distancing social. So it means you're going to have to come back and we'll talk about Shel Silverstein, among other things.
You got it.
All right. Well, thanks. And thanks to all of you for hanging out with us tonight. And we will see you next week. So.
Wow.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.